Shaun Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio that you can hear every weekday on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM at 4:30 Eastern. We're going to talk about a new report that has come out by RBC Royal Bank, BCG Centre for Canada's Future, and the Arrell Food Institute at the University of Guelph. Joining us right now to discuss the report and some of the potential to-dos out of it and maybe some of the outcomes. First up is Dr. Evan Fraser. He's director of the Arrell Food Institute at the University of Guelph, also a professor of geography as well. Dr. Fraser, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be had.
Yeah, I got lots of geography questions. We'll have to leave that to another time. But also joining us...
Lots of maps. Maps. It's all about maps.
It's all about maps. Going back to my introductory geography 1000 at the University of Lethbridge and how I struggled through that. Okay, also joining us is Mohamad Yaghi. He is with RBC Royal Bank. We've talked to him before. He's with RBC's Climate Action Institute, and he is the Agriculture and Climate Policy Lead. Mohamad, great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, okay, so a 9-point report. We're not going to be able to go through all 9 points. That would lead to a very, very long discussion, but right off the top, and Mohamad, I'm going to start with you. I got this question from an audience member last week, okay. And I might as well get before the report, but it fits very nicely into this. Why is this such a why is RBC involved in this stream? Like, what, this isn't necessarily banking and economics. What exactly is the objective here for RBC to put out reports like this?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I think it's an important one because it's one that I get all the time. So first and foremost, it's great to be here and be, talking about this really important topic with you today. And the reason, apart from banking the entire agricultural supply chain, RBC's interest in agriculture is really from 3 main reasons. The first one, looking at it from an economic perspective, agriculture is critical to our national economy. When it comes, we export over $85 billion in food every year to over 200 countries, and this is critical to our the balance of payment in terms of trade. So first off, it's vital for Canada economically. Second, I've had the pleasure of going across the country and meeting communities, agricultural communities in rural and urban areas. And from my personal perspective, and I think this really reaches out to the broader RBC, is that it really does bind, it creates our national identity. It really binds this country together from coast to coast. And for such a big country, agriculture is really that thread, that cultural thread that, brings us together. And then lastly, just looking at it from an innovation angle, in order for Canada to be innovative, the ag sector just has to be just as innovative. Otherwise, we're not an innovative nation. And it goes to some of the points in the report that we are a little lackluster when it comes to investing research and development funding for the agricultural sector. And it's a part of the economy that desperately needs it at the moment. When we look at our trading partners, we see huge amounts of public and also private investment into the sector, but we're lagging behind, even though we do have some sort of front foot right now when it comes to a lot of these climate smart initiatives.
Okay, so the report is entitled A New Ag Deal, a 9-point plan for climate smart agriculture. Now, Evan, it's very clear in the beginning of the report that you feel very strongly that Canada is falling behind. How so, and why?
So I think the first thing we should say is we have a tremendous ag food sector in this country. Ingenious farmers, producers, entrepreneurs, and innovators across the supply chain that are doing tremendous things. I think of the adoption, for example, of low-till or conservation tillage or no-till practices in the prairies, which has had a dramatic effect on boosting yields and increasing the amount of carbon dioxide that the soil absorbs and traps in the soil. So there's a tremendous good news story here that the producers of this country and every Canadian should really, really be proud of. And we lack federal and provincial funding in this sector. So you compare, say, the percentage of farm income that comes from government support, and Canada lags way behind the US, the EU, China, major agricultural nations. And then that lagging even gets worse or gets even bigger when you think of the percentage of farm receipts that are supported for climate smart agricultural practices, where there's a huge percentage of, 2%, I believe, of farm receipts are directly supported by the Chinese government to do climate smart agriculture. In Canada, the number is more like 0.5%. So we have a chronic underinvestment in agriculture, and we could debate why that's the case for years. Perhaps we just take our farm sector and our producing sector a little bit too much for granted. We have always had abundant land and lots of water and a savvy workforce and whatnot, and so we just sort of assumed that we should put all our eggs in the aerospace or EV or automotive baskets, and not really remembered that agriculture is actually a massive part of our economy and a massive part of our social fabric. So, if nothing else, this report, which is actually the latest of 5 reports that the team at RBC, Royal Bank, Boston Consulting Group, and University of Guelph have put out this year, is hopefully a wake-up call for this country that we should stop neglecting agriculture.
So is the thought, Evan, that there needs to be more direct subsidy of the industry, or like at the tail end from a farm profitability standpoint, or is it more of an incentive based? We're not funding research, for example, in order to come up with innovative solutions? Like where's the gap there from when you make those comparisons, Canada to the US, Canada to the EU, et cetera?
Well, the short answer is all of the above, frankly. To get a little bit more useful, though, in my answer, one of the things that we expect farmers to do is produce high quality, safe and sustainable, tasty, nutritious food. And they get paid that. Not enough, probably, and margins are very low. Increasingly, we're also asking farmers or producers writ large to protect the environment, to sequester carbon, to manage for biodiversity, to absorb stormwater. And there's no income stream associated with providing what me as an academic might call it, and this is a terrible phrase, an ecological good or service. That we've got these ecological services like absorbing greenhouse gases, and we just sort of assume farmers will adopt management practices that do that without any financial incentive to do so. And so given that there are no financial incentives to say, absorb carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases, it's remarkable that farmers have adopted management practices that do that across Canada and especially in the prairies. So yay for our farm sector. Thank you for doing the good work, seriously. And what we're pointing out with this report is that there's a need to redo our financial instruments to reward farmers financially, producers financially, not only for doing the good work of producing safe, nutritious food, but also protecting the environment more.
Yeah. So, Mohamad, I guess building off what Evan's saying there, is Canada too focused on, like, are we just one-dimensional when it comes to climate policy in regards to agriculture, in the sense there's this carbon tax, and hey, that solves all of our problems, and we're not looking at this with the, in terms of the nooks and the crannies and all the nuance involved that we should be?
Absolutely. And, just to echo Evan's point, I loved everything Evan just said right now. But to your question, Shaun, absolutely. The policy approach at the moment is a little one-dimensional. There's nothing really like a sandbox environment for our producers in the country at the moment. When we look at what the Inflation Reduction Act is doing in the U.S., there are a lot of really creative programs that, in terms of funding, and it's not only about providing subsidy for subsidy's sake and matching that subsidy. It's about, what we learned by talking to over 500 producers this year. It's about creating these economic opportunities, and can we make this moment one that is an economic opportunity for our producers, as opposed to one that is more of we're putting restrictions on your ability to farm at the moment. From the farmers I spoke to across the country, there's a lot of excitement, and a lot of producers really do want to try different techniques, different methods, some methods that we haven't even heard of yet. But a lot of the policy programs that are out there are really restrictive. They don't let them expand. They're doing their own research and development, but they're not really looking at output-based projects at the moment. It's more of follow these tight regulations, submit a huge application that will maybe take 8 months to hear back from us on. And by that time, even funding may be dispersed. So are we effectively rolling out policy programs that are benefiting the sector. And what we're calling for is a menu of options for different farms across the country to take advantage of, because one farm may not be able to take advantage of that program as opposed to another farm that, let's take the example of carbon credits. A smaller farm is not going to gain advantage when it comes to carbon credits. They might not get as many carbon credits as one that is maybe around 50,000 acres large, for instance. It's the economics are really different, and we have to provide a menu of options to tailor to those farms as opposed to a one-size-fits-all program. There's no silver bullet here. We have to provide a lot of options to our producers so that they can take advantage of it and get remunerated for the public good that they're doing when they sequester carbon or cut emissions on their farms, no matter how they do it.
Evan?
Yeah, just to add on a small point there, one of the things I think that surprised me the most, or the thing that I'll take away from this year of working with these folks, is the idea that adopting climate smart agricultural practices costs money, but only in the short term for most farms that we've studied, most farm types that we've studied, whether it's a small vegetable farm or a big grain or oilseed farm. There's a cost to adopting a climate smart agricultural practice, which involves learning new technologies or techniques or management practices. And there's a bit of a hit to yields for a couple of years, or there's some capital expenses that a producer has to make. But that almost all the research that I've seen and that we've collected as a part of this suggests that there's a business case over a sort of a 4, 5, 6 year period. And that after that sort of transition period, farmers are producing more and more profitably, as well as building up, say, soil organic matter or doing other things that trap greenhouse gases. So it's not like there is a long-term, as far as I can see, it doesn't feel like there's a long-term, quote, subsidy needed. Rather, there is a front-end investment needed to help transition from current management practices to what we're calling climate smart management practices. Buy some new equipment, learn some new tools, maybe have a hit to your yield for a few years while you're transitioning. But it's really building a bridge between now and then that we're calling on this menu of options that Mohamad just referred to.
Yeah, so to that point, I think you've got it right in the sense that there's criticism warranted when we're talking about some of these change in practices that some people have been implementing for years. Some people have been playing with. Some people, hey, that's not a fit for where I am geographically or for my operation, whatever have you. We always start with the ideology. We don't bring the farm profitability and the ROI part of that discussion in soon enough. And so I think what's continuing to happen is that we're struggling to have conversations about this because we're stuck in ideology. And what happens is we push into our political tribes and we really don't actually connect and have a discussion. And I think that everybody talks a different language, so to speak. Farmers talk about return. Listen, look at no-till. There is clearly a great agronomic practice, an environmental practice, and it's had a ton of benefits. It also has a return, an ROI. Otherwise, people wouldn't have done it. And so I think that's a classic example, and that ROI needs to be a bigger part of the discussion. So that's enough of my rant. I'm interviewing you guys, so
Amen.
Okay.
Amen.
Okay.
We're all ranting together.
Yeah, we agree on that. Okay. Now, and I have had, Mohamad, I've had this discussion with your colleague, John Stackhouse, several times, the IRA, and that is the Inflation Reduction Act. It is a U.S. program. It is big dollars. It is big business. It's as much a climate bill as it is as much legislation around creating jobs in the U.S. It is a lot of things besides just trying to reduce inflation, which may be the least of all of those things. You say that we have to have a response from a Canadian perspective. Why?
When we look at different parts of the economy, how are we reacting to IRA at the moment? We haven't had a significant response. And I think with the agriculture especially, there is such an opportunity to grow the sector, to capture a lot of opportunity when it comes to exporting. But at the moment, producers aren't getting the same sort of funding that a lot of our partners are getting currently. And if we want to compete in this post-IRA world, we have to have a response so that we can ensure that competition is fair for our producers as well. And at the moment, we're not seeing much from the federal government at this point in time. And what we're calling on is, it's not about matching the exact amount of funding from IRA. It's really about, can we proportionally match it? But then also, can we provide policies that are economic opportunities? And again, it's not providing subsidy for subsidy's sake. It's really about, all right, we're thinking about sustainability. We're thinking about our targets. There's national targets that the government wants to hit. But the policies there are very restrictive for producers when it comes to return on investment at the moment. And what we need to ensure is that any policy that is created creates not only an environmental advantage or gain, but also an economic one as well. And we can do it hand in hand. When we talk about soil health, essentially, it's really about sequestering more carbon as well at the same time. 65% of our producers in Canada have adopted at least one form of sustainable or climate smart practice on their farms. So we're already there. We're already on the front foot. It's just about taking advantage of this moment. And at the moment, we're not having that frank discussion that we need to have in order to push things forward so that we can match and not only become a more powerful agricultural producer, but be the world's sustainable breadbasket as well.
Yeah, Evan, well, first of all, Mohamad, I like the front foot reference. That's a nice football term. I like that. So Evan, any idea in terms of, okay, if we are going to have our proportional competitive response to the IRA, what's the price tag, and does the regular taxpayer embrace that, or is there pushback in terms of this new money flowing to the industry of agriculture?
All right, so there's a lot to unpack there, Shaun, and
Yep.
and I'm first of all, I think one of the things, and maybe this is ideology, or maybe this is me trying to read the tea leaves and see where the direction of trade is heading. But I think one of the things the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, throws into sharp relief for me is the idea that sustainability, monitoring and measuring and reducing ultimately greenhouse gas emissions linked with food, this is table stakes when it comes to doing international trade in food in the next generation. The European Union has a similar set of regulations. Many food processors are increasingly asking producer associations and producers to account for their greenhouse gas and their water footprints, for instance. So we're moving, I think, into an era where we're not quite there yet, but that measuring and reducing our environmental footprint of food systems will be required in order to participate in markets, especially international traded markets. So I think in some ways we're trying to just catch up and get ahead of where the regulations, government regulations and industry regulations, are pointing us anyways. Secondly, I don't think this should cost money. It should be in the form of fairly revenue neutral activities, in that extra productivity, say by climate smart agriculture, should over time offer, and I'm just going to quote you back to yourself, a decent return on investment. Now, there's a risk associated with adopting new technologies. There's transitions and disruptions associated with new management practices. So it won't be smooth or easy, but I think ultimately this is a system that will be more sustainable and be more productive. So that should net itself out in some degree in terms of costs. So, like I said, I don't want to leave people with the impression that the ag sector needs to go cap in hand to the public purse and get subsidized for doing sustainability. I think the ag sector, as a country, we should embrace a sustainable ag sector as a national mission, or as a moonshot that Canada can lean into. I think that we should be doing the basic research, building the infrastructure, and creating the financial instruments to reward it, and that all the research that I'm seeing suggests that over a 5, maybe 10-year period, we will be better off if we do so. And we will be protecting our export markets. So there's a defensive and an offensive, to keep with the football analogy or the sports analogy, element to this strategy, I think.
The best offense is is good defense. So Evan, do you think one of the current challenges has been, as these policies are brought forward, we tend to try to fit everybody into the same hole. And what I mean by that is we don't, if you're at 100,000 feet and looking at the industry of agriculture, there's two, my again perception is we have this propensity to a farmer is a farmer is a farmer, without recognition that let's just use cover crops as a really good example. That's an easy one to pick on. You think about the drought zone, and if I am in East End, Saskatchewan, I can barely keep my pasture in shape. Never mind the idea of planting a crop that I'm actually going to take up moisture and then destroy, which is much different than if, say, I am in the Ottawa Valley. What are your thoughts on recognizing the variability across this country, across the different sizes, shapes, and types of farms that we have?
So complete agreement. I mean, and cover crops is probably the example that I would have gone to first. Cover crops work great in much of Ontario, are impossible in many parts of productive Saskatchewan. So we can't just say, yay, you're doing a cover crop, you get a point.
Yeah, right.
Because that doesn't work. So one of the things that I really am proud of that we did with this massive consultation across the country is we and John Stackhouse, you mentioned, and Mohamad deserve a huge amount of credit for this. We talked to a tremendous number of farmers in different regions and different production systems, because we are not a country and there isn't a farmer or a producer. And then if you look at our 9-point plan, and you said at the introduction that we weren't going to go through all 9 points because that would be really boring, and I agree. But if you look at the 9-point plan, therefore things as varied as, let's build the infrastructure to create a biodigester network to help turn the methane that comes off of the livestock facilities into green natural gas. That was one sort of aspect of this plan. Another one is to create a national soils database so we can better measure the effect of things like cover cropping on greenhouse gas emissions, because it's different in Ontario and Saskatchewan. Another is, let's invest more in training the next generation of producer so that they have the skills and technological know-how that they can compete in this rapidly changing technologically and sophisticated world. So there's no one size fits all in this 9-point plan. It's a really, I think, pragmatic, grounded in the producer experience and useful set of steps that at some point will touch base on all the different farming producers in the region, but it doesn't make a one size fits all mistake, I don't think.
Yeah, no, Mohamad, you and I were on a panel in Lethbridge. I was able to join you. So I know, you know, you did make it across a good part. We had a fun evening there in Lethbridge doing that.
I'm sorry I missed
fun.
it.
Yeah, it was
a lot of fun.
Yeah,
good steak.
It was quite good. Now,
Dang.
in your trips across the, you know, in the different locations you went to, is there anything that you heard? They were loaded with producers. Like, I'm thinking of the one in Lethbridge that I was at. Is there something that surprised you, where it was like, okay, there's a consistent thread I'm hearing in all these different locations that maybe was kind of off my radar a little bit, and I was really glad I had this experience of talking to people face to face?
Yeah, I mean, you can't replace the experience I've had for the past year meeting with, I think, more than 500 producers across the country, and it's been incredible. And just, you know, one of the most impactful things that I heard, and maybe initially it didn't click for me, but it was really about, a lot of producers are in it and they want to participate, they want to contribute. And I think it's about the dialogue at the moment has been framed in such a way where it seems like a mandate, and what has to happen and what the communication has to change, and this is something that I've observed time and time again, is when it comes to policies that are being announced or the approach to the policy design, it has to look at the economic incentive. And I mean, no, we're going back to what we mentioned earlier now, but it's more about producers want to get on with the work and they want to know, they just want to do it. And a lot of, you know, when we see a lot of discussion nowadays, it's more about how can we reduce or cut, or how can we reach this certain target, as opposed to having a conversation about this is the market mechanism you can work with. You do it your way, but we want to collectively reach this goal. And I think that the discussion about the role of producers in the country and how they can help with our national emissions is one that has been missed, unfortunately, because they have a substantial and critical role in this discussion. And it's not about producers have done a bad job. They've actually done an incredible job. They're ahead of in global metrics in terms of how well of a job they've done, but they're not being recognized for it. And I think these policies in this 9-point plan have that framing and that approach, and that we understand and appreciate the work that you've done. This is how we can move ahead. while making everyone in the sector more profitable as well. And just to Evan's point earlier, just about the database, I mean, when we talk about information these days, a lot of producers don't have access to this critical information. The national database, for instance, that we're proposing, having information about what sort of practice is going to work according to the class of your soil is not available to producers at the moment. So when they're assessing what should I do, they don't have that information. There's a huge lack of data. And I know that, a lot of, folks will come onto the program and talk about how there's a lack of data, but when it comes to like understanding what they should do, and what programs they should implement on their farms, they just don't have that access to information, whether it be through a database or through an advisory network, that one that's sufficient and accessible at all times.
Okay, I got a couple more questions, okay, and then we'll wrap up here, guys. I really appreciate the time you've given me here. So, Evan, you've referenced like comparing to Europe. I'm not sure that resonates sometimes with producers. Like, oh yeah, well Europe, they're in a whole different land. They're trying to ban nitrogen. China, economic system there that I'm not sure that people want necessarily to have here when it comes to government support. But the comparison to the U.S., that to me is different. We compete around the world. It's also in some ways a different political system, but the most like ours in terms of belief from the there's a lot of similarities between the farmers and what they're striving to do on a daily basis. A lot of reference to the U.S. in the report. You've mentioned the IRA already. To me, this is kind of what we, as Canada, we need to be more focused on comparing ourselves to what the U.S. is doing. I think there was a signal from the report you did that. Was that strategic to kind of create a little bit more of a real context for people as in terms of how far Canada is behind?
Absolutely. I mean, just quote you a couple of numbers that we've sort of talked around this last little few minutes. Unless we're wrong, by our calculations, in the U.S., 12% of farm income comes from government support, and this comparative number is 10% in Canada. So a small gap, but a significant gap there. But the real gap is when you think about the support that goes to climate smart agriculture. So it's something like 1.8% of farm revenue in the U.S. comes from government support for climate smart agriculture. The equivalent number is 0.5% in Canada. So the U.S. is funding, as a percentage of farm income, more than three times the Canadian government in terms of supporting farmers to do climate smart agriculture. And yet we have this vision of Canada as being the world's leader of trusted, safe, and sustainable food. And there's a disconnect. Our money isn't where our mouth is on some of these points, and it is with regard specifically to the U.S. I mean, those numbers and those comparisons even get bigger when we talk about further off markets. So that's a big problem, I think, that we have to face as a country.
It's interesting. Secretary Vilsack, he talks frequently about climate smart agriculture. If that's what we're, the bubble we're talking in here. It will be a secondary income for farmers. Now, I've always been like cautious. He's doubled down and tripled down on that a lot because, there's a potential that he's overpromising when I hear secondary income compared to the primary income. That comparison may not be as equal as he makes it out to be. We don't hear that a lot being put that way in Canada. Do you think that's a mistake or the smart decision by the federal government?
Well, I think it's a mistake is the short answer. I mean, the idea that farmers are increasingly called on not only to produce food, but also to provide carbon sequestration, for instance, or climate resilience, or biodiversity protection, or we need to create income streams to reward those kind of activities. And that's quite common in the UK, for instance, where farmers receive money for fixing dry stone walls and maintaining cultural landscapes and providing environmental management plans and producing good quality food. And so it's not a foreign concept that there would be multiple income streams coming into a farm, some of which are attached to food production, some of which might be attached to other things that landscape provides to society, and then some of which come from other things that the farmer might choose to do. I grew up on a farm that was heavily subsidized by my grandmother, who was a stockbroker. The idea of off-farm income isn't an alien one for a vast majority of Canadian farmers or producers. So I think it's an extension of that set of ideas into payment for environmental goods and services, which is an academic phrase to say, if a farmer is deliberately taking a loss on yield for a couple of years to pull out carbon out of the atmosphere, or is going to invest in a biodigester to take methane out of the atmosphere, there should be some form of compensation from society back to that producer.
Mohamad, we'll finish up with you. Now, I'm sure there's somebody listening in the audience. They're thinking this question, and I'm going to ask it. Okay, this all sounds great, guys. What if we just do nothing? Like, why do we need all this government intervention? Let's let the free market work. If there are technologies that come out that give a return for the farmer and they provide, sustainable options, farmers are going to embrace them. So why do we need so much government involvement here? Let's just let the free market operate. What's it? Maybe that there's always an option to do nothing. So what do you think?
Yeah, just to challenge that question, the way I would frame it is the government should be involved in order to create free market opportunities, be it through the value chain of biodigester networks. We currently don't have that at the moment. When it comes to measurement, reporting, verification, we don't have the standardization with the protocols from the federal government or even provincial governments to have a better understanding about what's going to be accepted. And the key to this, by unlocking what we're referring to as shorthand MRV, by unlocking this and getting that standardization in place, produces and creates an entirely new market to create that secondary stream of income. That's where intervention is needed. It's not about they just need to pump more money. That's not solely what we're looking at. We're trying to say that when we look at different countries, even like Australia, for instance, their carbon credit program has issued around $300 million to only 150 properties in the country. And that's because they have a regimented system in place at the moment where measurement is trusted and investor confidence is high. So when we're looking at it from a Canadian angle, we have to learn from our partners all around the world, because a lot of our partners maybe aren't really playing within the rules or the confines of what we've all agreed upon. And what we need to ensure is that we have to put as many advantages and also programs in place to ensure that producers have access to those opportunities as well, in order to secure that secondary source of income as well. And that's where I'll leave it for that.
Awesome.
Go ahead. One additional thought for me is appropriate role for government in this whole process is to de-risk these investments. I mean, we don't 100% know how to measure accurately soil carbon off of farms. We need to de-risk that activity. We don't want farmers to bear, or producers to bear, all the risks of investing in new and maybe not fully proven out in a market sense technologies. I think there's a really appropriate role for governments to help reduce the risks of adopting new practices and adopting new technologies. And that is a really sensible role for government to play as we think of a transition in the farm economy.
So good point, though. But some would say, why are we trying to de-risk something that we don't actually know provides the outcome that we're searching for? Are we getting ahead of ourselves, though?
I mean, again, maybe this is a position of ideology. I don't think we have the luxury of waiting for everything to just sort of naturally come to the surface. We need to get ahead, of our competitors, which we see racing ahead, like the US. So there's simply an economic, wow, things are moving fast in the States. We better try to catch up, or we're going to be left behind. And my own feeling as someone who studied climate change and the climate crisis for 25 years from a scientific perspective is Mother Nature is changing faster than we have allowed ourselves to be aware of. And if we want to be ahead of the climate crisis, we need to be playing catch up in a big way.
Guys, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate your insights here. Thank you so much. The report is A New Ag Deal, a 9-point plan for climate-smart agriculture, Boston Consulting Group, RBC Royal Bank, and the Arrell Food Institute at the University of Guelph. Dr. Fraser, thanks so much for joining me here.
Thank you.
And Mohamad Yaghi of RBC Royal Bank, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'd love your feedback, everybody, of what you heard here today. Encourage you to go to the RBC. Actually, you can go to thoughtleadership.rbc.com to find the report. If you can't find it there, just send me an email. Also, would love your feedback. shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Until next time, cheers, everybody.